So hello everyone. So in the previous session we talked about the meaning, scope, significance, and we saw the concepts like positivism, post-positivism, interpretivism, etc. So like I said in the previous class, that whatever is there in the session plan, we will be covering that plus more. So in every session we'll try and give something more. While looking at the previous year's questions, we identified certain themes, right? Obviously NPM, NPA is something that we'll take up, but meaning, scope, significance, Wilson, and the impact of globalization is something that was a spillover from the first unit, and that is something that we intend to take up today. Along with that, if you'll see the session plan that we have today, and for tomorrow it's mentioned the CPA and the development dynamics. So we'll be taking up that as well, right? But after the stuff which we have to do, and I want to bring out certain newer perspectives. Newer in the sense that you all are already aware of it. It is just my job to make you more conscious about it, and so that you are able to write answers. And to do this, we'll start with a PYQ. Okay, the impact of globalization aspect. So let me just fetch that PYQ to begin with. Globalization has constructed the administrative state. That means globalization has constructed the administrative state to save and serve corporate power structure. Discuss how transnational cooperation, TNCs, transnational corporations, impact government and public administration in the contemporary era. Now please understand, whenever we are talking about globalization, there is a hidden meaning to it. One, we need to remember the India's journey. That is the first point, because that is the most easiest reference point that as Indians we can get. Okay. And the second aspect is the entire concept of globalization. So globalization does not come alone. It comes with certain things. Even if it's mentioned globalization, see, you have to play intelligently in the examination. It's mentioned globalization, but there are hues, undercurrents of, because TNCs have been mentioned. Liberalization and privatization. You might not, or you need not be more explicit about emphasizing on these points because of the fact that it will hijack the agenda of the question. Right? But we have to deal with it in a composite sort of a manner. We cannot be isolated. Also, I have seen in my experience, after evaluating probably thousands of copies, that the moment you actually hear the word globalization, you tend to write globalization means interconnected, this and that. Has the question asked you what is globalization? It hasn't, right? So the idea here is that we capture the essence of the question when it is saying that the administrative state, and you, even if there is no word, and this question is from 2019, even if there is no word, there is a critical element associated in this question. So you have to somehow try and feel the soul of the question. That it has, it is there to save and serve the corporate power structure. And transnational corporations impact the government and public administration. Okay, so you will have to mold your answers like this. So while capturing the essence, we will have to talk about that administration. Always when you understand nothing, boil down to basics. Okay? So administration as a concept is a highly ecological concept. It is impacted by the environment. The developments related to globalization have significantly impacted the public administration. Coupled with globalization, it has brought in liberalization and privatization. And often it is critiqued that such environment has created a hoopla of transnational cooperation, making public administration and the state serve and save the corporate power structure. However, there are differing opinions. This is the context setting that I would want you to make, for the reason that if I am the evaluator, I get to understand that you have understood the question. Okay? So with this kind of thinking in mind, let's start. Class nahi start hua, Mukesh bhaiya? Start? Okay. Right. So, if you see the word globalization, it itself has a very multi-dimensional perspective. Okay. Whenever we talk about the word globalization, we are talking and looking at, good afternoon everyone, friends who are watching us online. It's again a multi-dimensional idea. Right, and there have been various views on globalization. So, it is therefore resulting in linkages, both backward as well as forward linkages. While it impacts your domestic system, it also, or the effect of your domestic system also goes out. So, we need to understand that. Okay. Now, Richards and Smith, this is something which will benefit you. Richard and Smith actually talk about the idea of coming up of globalization. And they are looking at various social, cultural, political, economic, etc. reasons, okay, as well as the scientific reason that have contributed to it. Now, you will have to understand that globalization, though, is not a new phenomenon. If we look at the globalization started after Enlightenment. Is everybody understanding this? Because the power started going out, the European powers, colonization happened, cultural exchanges happened. Right. But the modern process of globalization that we refer to actually started in late 70s, 80s, opening up of China. And the downfall of communism is one of the major reasons for the emergence of globalization. Okay. The downfall of communism and the domination of the United States, economically, politically, militarily, culturally. You see, I don't know whether you have seen, are you familiar with the name Mikhail Gorbachev? Right. So, Soviet Union actually gets dissolved in late 80s or the early first 90s. And in the mid 90s, there is an ad. I don't remember if it's of McDonald's or something. And Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, appears in that ad. Okay, I mean it's there on YouTube. You can see that. So the cultural domination started coming into the picture, because you see these organizations, these very transnational organizations, actually hit you not just in terms of the financial might that they carry, but they get into the cultural aspect. Mac Aloo Tikki Burger. What is it? They are customizing as per the Indian palate. Okay. Also, you see, the Bretton Woods institutions that were created, World Bank, IMF, etc., etc., their role in preserving the world economic health, that was also in an eclipse mode. Why? Because you see, the era of 70s and 80s, where the West and the Western economies came in crisis. So these are the reasons. So whenever you look at the reasons of globalization, often most of the candidates out there start writing generic points. So we need to get particularistic. Like while talking about the advance, I said I'm not going to tell you anything new which you do not know. We are going to enhance how we can use it. So the collapse is another reason. Also technological reasons would be the development of telecommunications and internet computing. The first computers were built in 70s and 80s, the way we see them. Though the computers you can label even a calculator as a computer. But the information communication revolution which started in 70s and 80s, and it gained significant pace in 90s, and probably it is moving towards its epoch in the present context. So that is again a reason. Now understand, deregulation of the banking system, liberalization of trade, exchange rate. Earlier you used to have LIBOR and other exchange rates. They also contributed, because why? The movement of capital become easier. So it also contributes. Why I am saying this? Because this can be a general question, or you can use this idea somewhere. But the moment you put some scholars and you put certain broad heads, it immediately catches the eye of the examiner. Okay. And this basically led to the expansion of these corporations beyond the borders. Because markets were available, capital flow was happening, and the West had that sort of a capital. Okay. And this brought greater level of migration. Right. And hence, the reasons are these that contribute to the growth and furthering of globalization. Very interestingly, Anthony Giddens, actually define globalization. So instead of a general definition, you can refer to Anthony Giddens. Have you heard the name before? Suna hai pehle? Okay. He defines globalization as a new and revolutionary, mainly due to the massive increase in financial and forex transactions. So you see, post World War II phenomena, the emergence of the welfare state, 70s, 80s. So please try and visualize on two tracks. One is the contemporary development that is happening. Other is the theoretical development of public administration that is happening, because we can align globalization with the idea of NPM, PCT in present day governance, good governance. Okay, so the 70s and 80s, the West was in crisis and so was public administration, because the edifice of the welfare state to satisfy the aspirations of the citizens was getting questioned. So the traditional notion of administration was poised for a change, because the then existing welfare state was underperforming. And the market, because you see, if this is the state, this is society, and if it is fulfilling the aspirations well, then there is no vacuum. But the underperformance of the welfare state created that vacuum, and that vacuum gets occupied by market and civil society. And with this we can say NPM. So you will have to closely link, you will have to make these things on three parallel tracks and build bridges. Right? So while this market and they started asserting themselves over the traditional welfare state. So new societal patterns emerged, the values changed. Because in welfare state, the profit motive, the change of value for example, the profit motive was not considered a very good value. Right? You would have heard, your grandparents say, "Arey, private naukri." Right? So, but the values started changing. Profit was no more a bad word. So it brought about a change in value, and those values and the market forces are actually pulling the administration. Then the administration has to respond. And therefore this new pattern of administration emerged, wherein the state has to roll back. So there are reasons, empirical reasons, why governance paradigm emerges, and a multitude of things actually coming together: governance, NPM, all those things. Okay, so that is there, and hence we can say that it is a multidimensional phenomena. So I want you to analyze that. Okay, these were the social factors that were driving it. These were the strategic factors, the loans and etc. I mean, we all know that, so I do not want to emphasize upon that a lot. Okay, now you see this globalization has had a mixed reaction. People who were votaries, young scholars, young intelligentsia actually appreciated it, because at that instant it was solving the problem. Right? But the traditionalists, they were up in arms. They say, no, this is destroying the structure. Okay. Now, whenever you look at the impact of globalization and its larger impact on public administration, you will have to visualize public administration as an embedded entity within the edifice of the state. You cannot use dichotomy here wherein you disassociate the public administration from the larger edifice of the state. And democratic society actually thrive on the societal values. Because the elections will happen, no? The party, the people, the candidates who will strike a chord with the people, they'll only get elected. And if they are not echoing what the people are echoing, they'll be pushed out of the system. So, the pressure which was exerted from within the societies, democratic societies, and the international pressure, they all resulted in the furthering of globalization and impact on public administration. Write down the statement. Globalization is affecting the public administrative system. Globalization is affecting the public administrative system. And you can use this statement as an introduction directly. Okay. System, as it is embedded in the framework of the state. As it is embedded in the framework of the state. Full stop. This is to a great extent. This is to a great extent due to the impact of pressure generated. Due to the impact of pressure generated. Especially on developing countries by global institutions, comma, IT, that is information technology, and increasing concern over efficiency and economy. You see, through this I want to emphasize a point, because the global bodies that were providing the aid, they were putting their agenda forward, and to get aid the nations had to sort of mold themselves. So the domestic choice element of the citizenry in terms of the policy, the kind of administration, as well as the administrative priorities eroded. Okay, so a country's trade policy, fiscal policy, all those things were now beginning to get influenced by these global headwinds. So if you put in an answer this way, the argument, it will make more sense rather than simply putting that, okay, fiscal policy got impacted. How? Always remember to answer 3 questions in any answer. That is, what, why, and how. And this is the crux of your analysis, when we often say that analysis are not good. Okay, so it impacted the budgets. So the people were getting devoid of any choice. And to accommodate these new demands, these new pulls and pressure, the administration, as it was working as part of the welfare state, had to change. Okay. Apart from the fact that yes, more integrated markets, etc., etc., etc. So whenever we look at the economic benefits of globalization, it is mixed. Yes, it has given rise to private sector, jobs, entrepreneurship. It has made the populations more prosperous. But the element of choice, the impact of development, the rising gap between haves and have-nots, or in an Indian context we can say the difference between India and Bharat. Okay? So that is there. Though it largely developed, it benefited the developed countries, but the agenda which was propagated by the West was that it is helping the developing ones. Okay? So that is there. Now, benefits, of course, more choice, more connectivity, greater freedom, lower prices, greater availability of goods and services. Okay, that e-com that you see today is what? It's an extension of globalization only. Yes, it is possible now you can order a laptop and probably you order it now and tomorrow it will be delivered. Earlier you would have to go and search for this machine. Things like that. So a major shift that happens is that a majority of these countries which were in the developing phase, they were centrally planned economies. So the planning administration for development had to become decentralized. So the impact of globalization on planning, that is the decentralization of planning which happened. Okay? And you see, earlier, the perception of the people, probably you can ask your parents or grandparents before the era of LPG, they had different expectations from the state. Now we, our generation, has completely different expectations. So this has brought about the change in the society and the expectations from the administration. So if the administration is not able to live up to this, for example, if today I happen to tweet the district magistrate or the commissioner of police, I expect a reply. Whereas our parents, first of all, never tweeted, right? Or even when it was there, they were like, okay, this is like this only, we cannot say anything. So it has led to while on one hand we say that it has led to the shrinking of the element of choice, on the other hand, because of the virtue of the decentralized nature brought in the administration by the globalization or induced by globalization, has enhanced the democratic participation. Okay? Understood? Any doubts whatsoever? So while balancing a question like this, we'll have to balance, no? We can talk like this. Understood? So write down a few points about the criticism of the welfare state.
So regarding the first part of the question, globalization is constructed the administrative state to save and serve corporate power structure. So some points will like to justify that.
Right, obviously you'll justify, because the corporate power structure, the administration is changing because of the changes being induced by this very corporate power structure.
So at the same time, we can also mention the negative side of it, like crony capitalism.
Obviously, you will have to mention, you just told my words, you will have to write that negative impacts of this emerge, wherein the element of crony capitalism, monopolistic policies, predative agendas, they actually thrive. Okay, you will have to write. So what was the nature or what was the criticism of the welfare state? The criticism was that it was unresponsive but all pervasive. It was unresponsive but all pervasive. So that made the citizens that made the citizens dependent on the state. थोड़ा सा पर्सपेक्टिव मिल रहा है, थोड़ा सा डीप पर्सपेक्टिव मिल रहा है इसमें, है अमरजीत? समझ में आ रहा है? डीप पर्सपेक्टिव मिल रहा है थोड़ा सा, उसको ट्राई एंड एब्जॉर्ब इट, go back, revise, even if it might not be palatable, then you can ask in mentorship and you can come. Okay, so in this case, rather than making citizens self-dependent, the welfare state was making citizens dependent. It was an invasive state. Invasive state. It was an, next point, overextended state. Overextended state. That means that too many functions but very little outcome or performance. Also, if you see that the welfare state as it used to exist, it was an embodiment of elite capture. It was an embodiment of elite capture that used to serve their own interest. So whenever now link it with Weberian bureaucracy. When we talk about that it is a self-servient, inward-oriented entity. Okay? So that is another point that you should remember.
Rent-seeking theory can also be...
कौन सी?
Rent-seeking theory.
Yes, rent seeking is a manifestation of that inward orientation. No? Rent seeking becomes a manifestation of that inward orientation. Okay? And therefore you see that things like NPM etc. are gaining currency. And the idea of limited government takes the seed. That is, do less, minimum government, maximum governance. So even if in paper 2 you are asked about this phrase, minimum governance and maximum governance, so you can build this background. Okay. Privatization dictated the norm wherever services could be privatized. So these are just okay. And this gives rise to a belief that is governments by market. Governments by market. And you see, please, very interestingly, this government by markets phenomena starts emerging and nobody is finding fault with it to begin with. But when this gets far more obsessive, that is where the TNCs and other players start hijacking the true role of the state. Because they are becoming over assertive for their own interest. Because government by market is a positive agenda, that the market in certain fields is better than state. So we should leave those functions, those aspects to the market. Understood? And this gives rise to ideas like public good and private good aspect, because this is a product of the pro-market anti-state philosophy. Please understand, when we are talking about anti-state, it does not mean that the state as an idea should be demolished. The idea is that the gigantic nature, the all-pervasive nature of the state is not sustainable. Another very important aspect that happens because of all this is the coming up of management orientation in public administration. Management orientation in public administration. Now, if you look at the simplistic, legalistic view, it is nothing but the implementation of law, following the rule of law kind of an approach, and promoting public interest. That is the crux of public administration. But this management aspect is a new inducement which is brought by the globalization. So, the traditional administration as it used to exist used to heavily rely on a few aspects, that is rules, hierarchy, structures. Okay? And this, along with the other geopolitical developments, etc., give rise to the management orientation, and hence, comes up the idea of new public management. New public management, which actually labels the traditional administration as somewhat a failure. Okay? So that is there. So this managerial orientation in public administration, like I said, comes in the form of the NPM. And there you see a flurry of reforms. That is why you see 80s, Margaret Thatcher, Reaganism, Thatcherism actually started coming up. And from the 80s, it has now, it is the managerialism has transformed the way we see the public administration. And please understand, this NPM also is not an all-pervasive global phenomenon. It begins with the West, and then the globalization carries it to the other parts of the world, practically the developing part of the world. So this aspect you have to understand very clearly, and this you can link with the development dynamics and the CPA going forward. So whenever you talk about CPA in present era, always include this argument that NPM, yes, it was born in West. You have Reaganism, Thatcherism, comments of Al Gore. Al Gore was the presidential candidate for, during the time of Clinton, I believe, if my memory serves me right. Clinton or George Bush Sr., just fact check me on this. So the point is that NPM takes the seeds there, gets into its infancy and adolescence, and by the time this is happening, the Soviet Union is getting demolished, and the headwinds of globalization is actually carrying NPM to the world. Make sense? Logical? Any queries whatsoever? Friends watching us online, getting everything? Or are there any queries? Ane, others, Saurabh? So the globalization of NPM itself is a very important idea. Because you see, administrative and national relationships were started getting dictated by the economic and trade terms. If you look at even India's foreign policy, largely till 1780s it was about maintaining good relations, political reporting. Now you see, it is so much of free trade agreement, things like that are coming up. So that is there. Now, you see, earlier the goals were pretty different. The West had different goals, we had different goals, as in the developing world. But the goal convergence also starts happening because of globalization. So that is another manifestation of the globalization of NPM. So things like customer service, performance-based contracting, hey, this you can link with PPP. Okay, remember the interlinkages, they are very important. So all this again started coming up. And therefore, the stage was set. The undercurrents were there that the administrations will have to go for a change. What change? Reform. Now, if we are talking about reform, Mission Karam Yogi, we are talking about what? From rules to roles? यही है ना? This is the thing that we are talking. More citizen-centric administration. More about public goods, service and delivery. More about enhancing the accessibility, availability, reliability, sustainability. So the administration has to change. So you can link it with these aspects as well. And obviously this gave rise to ideas of regulation, arbitration, adjudication. So the public administration, which as part of the CPA, we are looking at it in comparative sense, wherein the West and the East differ, these lines started blurring. So if I write a question that globalization has enriched the field of comparative public administration, yet dismantling the traditional notion of CPA. Discuss. समझ में आया? Because the traditional notion was the CPA you compare. Now it is converging. समझ में आ रहा है अमरजीत? या ऊपर से जा रहा है? आ रहा है? ठीक है. So the point is this, that we will, the goal convergence is happening, and I made you write those in features. So this is leading to this, and this will impact the CPA as we know. That is why you see there is an old CPA and new CPA. पता है? क्या पता है? बताओ. वो तो ठीक है. फीचर्स क्या थे? फीचर्स ऑफ ओल्ड सीपीए एंड न्यू सीपीए. नहीं गैस कर रहे हो या पता है? I'm not talking about the theories. I'm talking about the characteristics of old CPA and new CPA. Simple question. Tell me 4 or 5 characteristics of old CPA and the corresponding characteristics of new CPA. चलिए, homework 1. Right? And the mechanism has been shared in first lecture. In first 15 minutes, the mechanism is there. Okay, how you will send in the responses to me. The difference between the old CPA and the new CPA, and how globalization shaped the new CPA or impacting the new CPA. So you see, with this globalization, even the scope and the ambit of public administration is also expanding. It is now supposed to travel to areas which were hitherto not the part of its realm, but now they are. So इस तरीके से you will have to, through this you will have to link stuff. Otherwise it's going to be problematic. Okay? Understood? So the globalized nature of public administration has emerged. It is no more confined to the regional or national identities. So there can be a question on the globalized nature of public administration or the globalization of the NPA itself. Understood? Understood? Ane, friends watching us online? Now tell me, a very important part. Let me erase this. See, think. Any doubts with regards to interlinking, bring them to me. But you must start thinking. And like I said, we are taking up the topic of globalization, but we are touching upon, so many things. Evolution, etc., etc. That's the purpose of advanced classes. I cannot go from A, B, C, D, etc. because there is no point. That's something which is done for AB initio candidates. Is this management orientation which we are talking about new or old? No, I'm not saying from the idea of managerialism just in today and with comparison to Taylor. I'm talking about as the philosophy in the working of public administration. This is old. The idea of managerialism is old. In the 16th and the 17th century, countries like Germany and other parts of Europe, France, etc., they used to maintain a treasury. A treasury has always been there. What? For fiscal management. Right? But that idea of managerialism was combined with the idea of centralism. What the new manifestation of managerial orientation is, that this managerialism is combined with the idea of decentralism. This is the difference. So that used to be known as the cameralism. Okay. CAMERALISM. So cameralism emphasized on administrative technology as a key to effective state management. Separation of policy from execution. A sound financial system. A centralized top-down approach. And you see, globalization actually gave reasons differently for the world to, the Western developed world to globalize and for the developing to globalize. So I'll mark out those reasons for the developed worlds and for the developing or crisis-ridden countries. There were different reasons, motivations. You see, 70s and 80s fiscal crisis in the developed world. Right? Oil crisis were there, other crises were there. Whereas here, the debt and the balance of payment crisis in the developing or the crisis-ridden world. Here, the goal was efficiency and effectiveness for public services. Here, it was induced by Bretton Woods institution. Structural changes, deregulation, rollback of the state. Those were the motive. Ultimately, to reduce the deficits. Here, the new right philosophy, neoliberal agendas start gaining the currency in policy making. 70s, 80s, when I say Reaganism, Thatcherism. Okay. Here, so you see here when we talk about the Reaganism, Thatcherism, it is happening at a meta scale, at the ideological space. Whereas you look at ideology in today's India, it is still government hai to acha hai. I will open my bank account in SBI. I will take an LIC insurance. Here it was not ideological. Here it was actually supported by the structural adjustments that were actually due to the liberalization policies. We were merely restructuring. Our soul did not change. Okay. Also you see here the power structures were changing. Conservatives, were going out and things like that. Okay, coming into power of rather conservatives. I'm sorry. Okay, here the policy, the politics remain unstable through the 90s. See India, coalition governments one after the other. Here in developed the information technology, they were leading the change. Here we were following the change. So both had different sort of impact and motivations. Right. So we can, this was labeled as a progressive public administration. The managerial philosophy, whenever you talk about the managerial philosophy, you will label it as PPA. Progressive Public Administration. Progressive Public Administration. Right? And this PPA is the modern avatar of the cameralism that we were talking about. Okay? So in the evolution, when you write the ecological approach, you can talk about these things. Right? Understood? Any doubts whatsoever? Any doubts whatsoever? Okay. So this basically ends my hint on the discourse about the impact of globalization. Through a question, through a PYQ, we try to look at it. Just flip through the pages and let me know if you have any doubts or queries. Otherwise, we'll move to the other concept. Flip through the pages. कुछ है doubt जो समझ में आ रहा है. I hope you all understand that this is not the answer to the question. Right? I have just sort of through the question tried to demonstrate that how in different ways we can link and interlink the idea of globalization. Hanji. Should we continue? Okay. All right. Others, any doubts? Ane, friends watching us online, Saurabh, any doubt? Now, let's talk about the unit of comparative public administration. First, let me give you an idea that what are the highlights of this unit in terms of the high yield areas that we need to focus upon. Marks distribution is something that I discussed in the previous session. Okay. Now, there are a few things, and obviously they are not different from what is given in the syllabus. Rigs, obviously, right? The sociological, historical factor, that are there. One question that comes and is a tad bit difficult to handle because rigs, agraria, industria, transitia, prismatic fuse, sala, you all know that, right? So I will not get into or deep dive into the models themselves. Let us be very clear on this. Still, if you have any doubts, you can ask in the mentorship. Okay, we'll be focusing on the linkages and the interlinkages like I told you. That is the present status. The present status or the current status of the CPA. A perspective of the current status was given when we were looking at the impact of globalization. Okay. And a few isolated questions do get asked on administration and politics in different countries. But largely it is the Rigsian model and the present status, the current status, that dictate the ideas that are asked in the examination. Roughly 25 marks that are there. In 2023, it was 30 marks. In 2022, it was 30 marks. In 2021, it was 25 marks. Okay? Just to help you with the idea. Now, whenever we look at CPA, can anyone for me define what CPA is? Hanji, बैठे हैं आप. रिवाइज करो यार ऐसे थोड़ी. हाँ दिव्यांशी. Just that. Is CPA, when you look at CPA, अच्छा चलो ये छोड़ो, origins of CPA, or at least the theoretical origins when we actually began to look the comparative idea amongst the nations as somewhat relevant to the, exactly, from Wilson, because Wilson emphasized on the comparative orientation. Why? Because the American administration, and this is something that I have hinted in the previous session as well, the American administration was in the crisis. So there was no solution coming from within. That is why he was beholden to the European administration, initially to begin with. Okay, so the idea of comparative public administration is not a new idea with the discipline. It's not a new idea like the NPM. The CPA has always been an undercurrent in the evolution of public administration, and through the evolution of public administration, the CPA has evolved too. But a major movement regarding CPA, we can say, starts in the late 40s. Who is the primary proponent? Thal. Okay. He actually advocates through 1940s, late 40s, and remember this is an interesting time. If you will remember public administration both as a discipline and as a practice, as a profession, and the contemporary developments, and build bridges across these three verticals, you will never forget. 1947-48 is an interesting time. It's the post-World War years, immediate years after the Second World War. New countries are emerging and they are looking for some development model. So you see, the comparative model and the scholars are invited across. We invited Paul Appleby and whatnot, Gavin Austin and this and that. So what is happening? They are bringing with them their own thinking, what their experience, their learnings have been in the West. Okay, so that is something there. But the first conference which was held regarding CPA was in the Princeton in 1952, and largely the agenda was post-World War world. And this is the same arena, please understand, where the behavioral school was gaining currency. Where the behavioral school was gaining currency. Okay, so scholars at this time are actually criticizing the TPA, Traditional Public Administration. They are criticizing it for its parochial nature. Okay? So you should remember the background which is there. So in this, I'll make you write certain definitions. Nimrod Raffaeli. AELI. Nimrod Raffaeli. So this chap, I guess, was not in the mood to do a lot of hard work. So he said that the CPA is nothing but a study of public administration on comparative basis. Whereas Jackson, not Michael Jackson, Robert H. Jackson puts it far more qualitatively. So he defines CPA as a facet of the study of public administration which is concerned with making rigorous cross-cultural comparison a facet of the study of public administration which is concerned with making rigorous cross-cultural comparison of the structures and processes involved in the of the structures and processes involved in the activity of administering public affairs. Right, very correct, Ane. Yes, that is what we were referring to. Okay. Now, when we look at the background of the development of the CPA, Second World War actually played the trigger, right? And various scholars, like I said, were fanning out across the globe. They were newly independent countries. And as something which was being increasingly, with increasing seriousness, it was looked at amongst the scholars, and that leads to the establishment of the CAG. That is the comparative, क्या है? Right, comparative administration group. And now please understand, this is a very small undercurrent, might not be useful for the examination directly, but it will shape your thinking process. Comparative administrative group was funded by whom? Ford Foundation, not by the state. Not by the state. Okay? So you had various scholars like Farrell, Heddy, Montgomery, Riggs, Waldo. These are the prominent scholars. And they were actually trying to understand the public administration across the various cross-cultural contexts. Now, in this, have you all studied about feral heady? पढ़ा है? क्या पढ़ा है? अरे यार, फिर क्या पढ़ा है? जब याद नहीं है तो फिर क्या पढ़ा है? Something like that. Okay, let's revisit this. Why? Because every time you have a conceptual question related to CPA, you should not rely only on rigs. Okay, so let's have somewhat orientation about the contribution of feral heady. Okay, so his foci of research was on 4 important aspects in comparative public administration. That is modified traditional, development oriented, general system model building, and the middle range theory. See, please be very clear. This is the period 62. CAG gets formed. And this is the same time, 58 Minnowbrook. I mean, same time, not the same year, but around the similar time. So CPA is very closely linked to NPA. And all of this was happening for development. है ना? So that is why you see when I'm sure all of you have read the Agraria Industria Transitia, Prismatic, Sala, etc. of Riggs. That is why in development dynamics also we have certain models. That is Wiedner, Riggs. Primarily we look at these models. Okay. Now, when you look at the modified traditional approach, as the name suggests, it retains a majority of the characteristics of the TPA or traditional approach with some descriptive enhancement. That is the modified traditional public administration or the modified traditional approach which Heady is looking at. Okay, so it retains its parochial character. Okay, so you have a parliament, I have a parliament. You have a prime minister, I have a prime minister, and somewhat descriptive orientation. Okay. The development oriented approach, the foci of his research, actually looks at the problems related to public administration. Why? It is looking at problems, not in isolation, in the environment of the socio-political changes. The development focus is concerned mainly with the problems in the political and socio-economic changes. The idea is basically, is your administration effective enough to drive the socio-political change for better? If it is better, then you are a better administration. Or how far it can derive the socio-economic change. Okay? Whereas the general system model is not just looking at the socio-economic, it is looking at the environment as a whole, political, social, economic, cultural, linguistic, every sort of comparison which is there. Middle range theory is somewhere in the middle of all of them. It is selecting some, it is not selecting some. On bureaucracy, Hedy says that the administration or the bureaucracy is nothing but a subsystem, of the political system. That means that the bureaucracy has a far greater level of interaction with the political system vis-a-vis the economic or socio-cultural system. Okay? In this, he keeps the concentric circle aspect that you were talking about, where the influences, because the nearest is the political system, then the social system, and those systems. Okay? So the larger system would be general society. Right? Understood this? So in his analysis, he comes up that France and Germany have the classic administrative system. Whereas the British and American have a civic culture. Please understand. Pay very important attention to this. We have the political culture. Paper 2. बैठ रहा है नहीं बैठ रहा लिंक है ना. Largely we talk about almond and verba, but there you can use Hedy as well. ठीक है? So please be mindful of this. Tag your notes accordingly. Whereas in countries like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, etc., these are the traditional autocratic system. Whereas countries like Pakistan, Thailand, where the bureaucratic elite, you know Pakistan, everybody knows Pakistan, right? An army that has a country, right? Whenever I talk about Pakistan, I always remember a charming fellow, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He said, if we may, we will eat grass, but we will have our bomb. Look, they have their bomb and they are eating grass. Okay, so they represent this bureaucratic elite system. So the cultural values, the political culture is like that. अब linkage बैठ रही है थोड़ी थोड़ी. CPA से पेपर 2 लिंक करना है. Okay? So that is there. Further, the polyarchical competitive system. The polyarchical competitive system. As in the case of countries like Philippines. Next. Dominant party mobilization systems. Dominant party mobilization system in countries like Tunisia. Communist totalitarian system. Remember, we are in 70s. We don't have Stalin. We neither have Mao. So the communist system is also getting fogged into two dimensions. One is the communist totalitarian system that is represented by the North Korea. है ना? Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung, people like them. Okay? So that is something to note. So Heady actually, when he does the comparative public administration, he is looking at far more qualitative aspects. He is not looking at judging the developing world with a Western lens, which probably Riggs does. So Riggs, in comparison to, or Heady, in comparison to Riggs, he actually is looking at these developing countries, not simply comparing them with the Western models. Okay? Now, what kind of public administration, due to the comparative studies, actually thrive in these developing countries? What are the characteristics of the bureaucracy in these countries? You see, the public administration in such countries is imitative rather than indigenous. We carried forward with the British bureaucracy, the systems, rather than the indigenous systems. And what you do? You end up introducing the Western notions. Okay? The bureaucracy or the administration lacks the skills related to development. Okay? You please understand, it is not because of the fact that there is no working age population that is there. Rather, the administration is overstaffed but underskilled. Write down this, no? Overstaffed and underskilled. Lack of outcome orientation. Lack of outcome orientation. You see, the bureaucracies talk about broader abstract ideas, Garibi Hatao or the administration. They will never get into the specifics. How? Okay? There is a gap between the expectations and the reality. So you look at every 5-year plan that was made. It was so ambitious on agenda, but it never realized on the ground. Now planning chapter, central and state administration chapter, you can link things. Okay? Here you see the political class is largely confined to the parochial outlooks. Therefore, the bureaucracy has, or the administration has, a far greater degree of autonomy. So even if they were democracies, but the functioning of the state and the public administration was never truly democratic. Okay? Understood? Are you understood? Okay. Now, we have seen the various approaches to public administration, as in we have seen in the sense that we have studied various approaches to public administration. Let us look at approaches to CPA. Okay. Now, what I mean is that whenever I am indulging into comparative analysis, I will have to take a reference frame, no, based on what I will compare. So that is the approach. So the most prominent one has been the Weberian approach, where I have a concept of bureaucracy. So that is my master slide, and I will compare two or more nations based on that slide and will bring about my findings. Okay, so it's the ideal type bureaucratic model. Okay, Weber's model. So the first one is the bureaucratic approach. What will be the focus of this approach? Tell me. The focus of this approach will be rationality and effectiveness. Simple. See, deduce karte chalenge. We'll deduce, ask questions to ourselves, and then we'll try and find the answers. If it is the CPA, we need approach. Based on some yardstick, we'll compare, no? If there are two boys sitting here, on what basis I can compare them? Right? What's the height? So as to come, who is the taller one? What's the weight? Okay, some criteria has to be there. So the first approach is the bureaucratic approach, and the focus is on rationality and efficiency. Okay, so you will be looking at what? You will be looking at the types of hierarchy, structures, specialization, merit-based recruitment, discipline, training. Okay, those things are there. To the extent this approach is so much used that therefore some scholars, including Waldo, label CPA as a paradigm on its own. Okay? So Weber is not dead. Wilson is not dead. The initial pillars which were founded by Wilson, because see, very carefully link. If you are doing comparison, that is Wilson check 1. You will have some basis of comparison, that is scientific orientation, Wilson check 2. You are looking at rationality, efficiency, Wilson check 3. Similar is the check you can find with the Weber. The next approach that comes, so first one is the bureaucratic, the second one is the behavioral. So the moment bureaucratic comparative administration comes, straight away you can label Waldo. Because Waldo says that this becomes a paradigm on its own. CPA becomes a paradigm on its own. Behavioral approach किससे concern होगी? What will it concern with? अरे भाई, human behavior, where in isolation? No, in administrative or organizational setting. Now, if we are looking at the CPA, we are comparing two or more countries, then we should look at the behavioral aspects, and if you are following the behavioral approach, we will follow the behavioral aspects. So what happens? Analysis, aggressive data collection, experimentation, testing, and the focus is on interdisciplinary approach. Next is the systems approach. Okay. So here you can look at Eddy, because he is comparing it in concentric circles in the environment. So I need not say that it is looking at administrative system as a subsystem of the larger society. Okay. Riggs again is one of the scholars of the systems approach. So Rickson CPA is system oriented approach. So is Heady, but the difference that we talked about in both, that remains. Interesting thing. So based on this, Riggs actually makes his studies. Okay. Next is the structural functional approach. Please remember, whenever we are looking at these approaches, the similar idea, the ground rules of the approach will remain the same. They will apply to the approaches to public administration as well. पढ़े हैं approaches? याद है कुछ? यही थे ना? ठीक है. The idea is that here you are looking at the sociological, anthropological influences, the pattern of behavior that can be identified. Okay? Now another approach which comes is the development oriented approach. And this actually gives rise to a separate discourse on development dynamics. Told you CPA and DPA are linked. So CPA and DPA, one approach wise, the conceptual linkage. The practical linkage is when we see the time, the era, the environment which is created after the Second World War. ठीक है जी? You can write one word, just go and have a look at it once. That is the decision making approach. Decision making approach by Martin Landau. Decision making approach. Just make a 50-60 word note. This will help. Similarly, when we talk about Marx, and I am talking about Morstein Marx, X Marx. Remember, we have Karl Marx, and there is this another gentleman who is Morstein Marx. So he is also a scholar of the comparative public administration. Okay, and he is basically looking at it from the technical perspective, vis-a-vis the structure of the administrative organization and the civil service.
The structural functional approach, is it the one that has been mentioned by Riggs?
Riggs is following the systems approach. Structural functional approach, when you look at the sociological and the anthropological reasons. Okay. So that is there. That structure would refer to the pattern of behavior. Let me dwell more on the structural function. You understand, it is not a literal translation of the words. He uses structural functionalist perspective. That is there. But can we say that Riggs is a purely structural functionalist? No. He uses that approach. Yes. Structural functional approach. When he comes up with the prismatic Sala and all those things, he uses it. So here the structure would refer to the pattern of behavior. Whenever I am talking about structural functional approach, I am talking about the sociological and anthropological aspects. Therefore, the pattern of behavior. So you will identify a pattern that is a standard feature of a particular system. For example, in India, very interesting, you can link it with corruption. Aha, kya maza aaya hai. Ab suno. There is a culture of bakshish in India. You see, no, old serial, mythological serials and serials around kingdoms that, servant will come and say, Maharaj ki jai ho. है ना, जो रानी साहिबा ने एक बहुत खूबसूरत नौजवान राजकुमार को जन्म दिया है। वाओ, थैंक यू लॉर्ड, लो जाओ, ठीक है। सो द कल्चर ऑफ बख्शीश, दैट ब्रीड्स करप्शन, है कि नहीं? स्ट्रक्चरल फंक्शनल अप्रोच। ओके, द फंक्शन इज रेफर्ड टू द interrelationship between various structures. So this pattern of behaviors, this is the structural aspect. The relationship that is coming up is the functional aspect. ये clear हुआ? Now, while talking about the evolution, while talking about the aspects of globalization, I have linked the CPA there. Okay, so from this theoretical building, the approaches, heady, etc., let us now reflect on the current status of CPA. Now please understand, this is a dynamic area. Dynamic area in the sense, let me refer to certain PYQs. Let me refer to all PYQs that have been asked since 2016. I'm not getting into Rixian models and its critique. I mean, that is something which is very vanilla, very easily available. Okay.
I interrupted them. You got me telling about Mercy marks.
अच्छा, वो मैं भूल गया. Okay. Right. So, Morstein marks, basically, when we look at Morstein marks, he is also one of the scholars of the comparative public administration, right? And he is looking at the bureaucratic and the structural aspect. Okay, how the bureaucracy is structured, what is the performance of the civil services, what is the remit of its performance. So he'll be looking at administrative organization, the way it is structured. Okay, there is a chief secretary, departments, ministries, etc., and the role of the civil services. That is how Morstein Marx actually does his comparative analysis. So when I was saying that we should look at it from the PYQs, why? Because this is a very dynamic area. They can ask the influence of cross-cultural exchanges, increased financial dependency, technological changes, right? These things can be asked. So first, there's a question in 2019. The failure to discard the elitist character. The failure to discard the elitist character and the West-centric orientation of the CPA has led the failure to discard its elitist character and the West-centric orientation has led to the decline of CPA. Explain. Also, please note that when I was giving you the homework 1 regarding the old CPA and the new CPA, right, try and link this part as well there. Okay, 250 words, write it down, scan it, send it. Okay, how you have to send? The mechanism is there in the first session, because I am deliberately not touching upon the new CPA here, because I want you to do some homework, otherwise तो कोई point नहीं. ठीक है. So it is saying that the elitist character and the West-centric. notion of CPA. Why? Because you are not looking at the cultural aspects of the administration. You are only looking at the structural aspect from the Western lens. For example, in India, even if you happen to meet somebody who is elder to you, like 20 years, 30 years, by reflex you will call that, if it's a male, you will call that person uncle ya auntie, right? Or if you are in villages, still people would not call uncle and auntie, they will say chacha, mausi, mama, based on whatever is there. No blood relation exists. Whereas in United States, you will still say, okay, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Thomas, Mr. this, Mr. that. है कि नहीं? So the point is this, that the elitist orientation, because you are developing, so we can only make the comparative analysis, and the comparative analysis will go through the filter of our worldview, and we are only there to tell you what is right and wrong. That was the kind of the orientation of CPA. And that is responsible. So the current status, therefore the CPA is in decline. The CPA declined. Another question, 2020, 10 marker. CPA started with no paradigm of its own and developed none. So while scholars like Waldo etc. would say that CPA is a paradigm in itself, the critics would say that the CPA developed no paradigm of its own. And it started with no paradigm. You see, most of the prescription of the CPA scholars is nothing but a study. They do not give a prescription how to improve the administration, and that is one of the major critiques of the CPA. है कि नहीं? याद नहीं है, ये भी रिवाइज नहीं है, इतना तो है. चलो ठीक है. Yesterday, हाँ जी. Exactly, the intention was not theory building. Then why do you call it a paradigm? For the reason, that is the problem which is being flagged by the naysayers and the cheerleaders. Okay. Then, 2022. Now please understand, here the approaches will come in. It did, like I said, it did not give any prescription what to do. NPM, if you look at it as a paradigm, will tell you what to do. Whereas Rixian analysis and the Farrell-Heady and other comparative public administration scholars, they only flag the state that this is there, this is there, this is there, this is there. Largely there is no way forward in terms of what to do to bring about the improvement. So it came up with it's called as a false paradigm by a lot many critiques. Okay. Now this question is interesting. There is an abstract question. Administrative ideas must be seen in the context of environment, etc. This is something that I take up yesterday, but I'll just read it out for the sake of re-emphasizing upon it. 2020 20 marker. Administrative ideas must be seen in the context of environment that they develop. In the light of the above statement, examine the influence of NPM and ICT on the comparative study of public administration.
First statement mentioned, it is talking about the study of public administration and
discipline, ecology. Now it is making ecology as a smoke screen. Focus is on the comparative study of public administration, how ICT and new public management. Remember I told you about a point that how NPM etc. traveled. The globalization of the NPM aspect in globalization, वो यहाँ से आएगा. I told you at that time also, no, you can use it in CPA. See? So you will have to develop this sort of imaginative interlinking Otherwise, your answer will be just a reproduction of your notes in the examination hall. Features of CPA, prominent scholars, rigs, industrial transition. अरे ठीक है ना, फिर मिलेंगे 200 नंबर आएंगे 500 में से. If we have to cross 300, which is our target, we must think it like that. Okay. So yesterday I took this question up as a reference to the abstract question while discussing the pattern. Okay. There is a query. Revival of CPA, failure and the closure of CPA. And absolutely correct. That is why he gives a newer orientation towards CPA and is a far more sensitive orientation. No, Riggs wanted to give a sort of a universalistic idea, but his theory building was never prescriptive. His theory building never gave an action plan. He wanted to, create a theory based on analysis, but his theory building was never the action plan. And please understand, Riggs is a part of CPA. Riggs is not CPA. Understood, Anay? With regards to Farrell-Heady, our friend says that Farrell-Heady was the main proponent of the revival after its failure and closure of the comparative administrative group. That is clear. That is why you see Heady goes into this. And his one is a far more realistic analysis. And to the argument that Riggs wanted to create a universal theory of public administration by comparing different ecologies. So wouldn't it be wrong to say that it was not the aim of CPA to give a theory? We have to understand that Riggs was using the CPA approach to come up with a theory. CPA itself as a movement was never about the theory building alone. Okay? Chalo, clear hai na? Theek hai. Right. So this question, the administrative ideas must be there, right? Linking the globalization aspect, etc., and the globalization of the NPM itself. Okay. Next question, which is the current status of public administration. Weber's construct of bureaucracy has served a great heuristic purpose in furthering research in the field of CPA. I repeat. Weber's construct of bureaucracy has served a great heuristic purpose in furthering the research in the field of CPA. Do you agree with the statement? Give reasons. Bureaucratic approach. Bureaucratic approach. Similarly, if I remove Weber's construct of bureaucracy, systems theory has served as a great heuristic purpose in furthering the research in the field of CPA. है ना? ठीक है. So this is how the current status gets asked. Last one, 2023, a 20 marker again. The studies of CPA got momentum in 80s and 90s with new objective and orientation than its previous counterparts. किसकी बात कर रहा है ये? That is why I asked you, what is the difference between the old and new CPA? ठीक है? Alright. So now, let us look at the current status. Some points, obviously, I hope through these questions you would have understood that what we are hinting at. Now the current status of CPA, the major focus is on the ecology and development. Because we have seen that the old CPA with a Western view, with an ethnocentric view, was not a very effective way to go about it. So that the ecology and development, by definition, they are dynamic and flexible. So the CPA, which truly should actually reflect the cross-cultural analysis, these approaches or these focuses suit. Okay? Also, it is slowly shedding its own skin, old skin, of looking at it from the American administrative theory and Weberian perspectives. Also, more scholars from the developing world is participating. So these are nothing but some of the characteristics of the new CPA. Okay. So that is there. But there is a problem. While this is leading to the development of wider hypotheses, because more scholars are coming up, more diversification is happening, you are looking at it in the cross-cultural context, etc., etc. But no practical, experimentation is happening. So that is the problem. So it lacks the empirical analysis that is leading to the suboptimum performance of the CPA. Okay. Now understand the practical manifestation. There are prismatic elements. बहुत ध्यान से देखना इसे. This will be get used in your essay ethics everywhere. Prismatic elements are there. Prismatic elements कैसे? जैसे developing countries में होते हैं. They are existent even in the West. है ना? West में भी है. But the Western notion of administration never focused here. Hence they could not deal with them effectively. That is why you see gun culture in America, robbery, this and that in Canada and other places. That is still thriving. In spite of the fact that they are developed, you have social security, this and that, technology. So earlier, the project of the CPA when it started 60s, 70s, the idea was Western used to think, oh, we are elite. We will decide. Now, because of the CPA becoming ecological and developmental and the contribution from the developing world which is coming, the West can learn from the developing world in tackling these prismatic elements. ये बात समझ में आई कि नहीं आई? हाँ अमरजीत, समझ आ गई? So this is a prescription. So अब so as to say अगर मैं वेस्टर्न होता तो मैं कहता ये तो उल्टी गंगा बह रही है. Right? So they can learn. So this is today the CPA which has come to. आ रहा है मजा? थोड़ा सा कंसेप्चुअल है लेकिन मजेदार है ना? Earlier was west to east or developed to developing. Now it's becoming bidirectional, or ideally it should become bidirectional, where the studies of the CPA in public administration can help the West to tackle the prismatic elements within their society. Okay? Earlier what they were saying, that we are the best, you imitate us. Or they were judging or grading the administrative system based on their lens. Now that lens is no more there preserved. It has become far more democratic. So, new CPA for you. Okay. Also the newer developments which are cross-cultural, where it suits, so it has enhanced the flexibility of CPA, it can be employed. Okay. So increasingly the administrative development, the administrative theory development, which is largely still the West is its cradle, so as to say, and the CPA have started becoming more ecological. Okay? Understood? After the exam, if you are preparing for new attempts, God forbid, okay, then there is a book by Professor R.K. Arora on CPA itself. Read it. 200 odd pages, very good book. Understood, friends watching us online? ये इनसाइट्स पहले कभी समझे थे, पढ़ा था ऐसा कुछ? नहीं देखा था? रिग्स
मतलब उसमें क्रिटिसिज्म में ये पॉइंट था कि उसको बहुत आइडियलिस्टिक देखा जाता है कि ऐसे ही होना चाहिए,
बट अप्रोचेस के थ्रू नहीं दे.
ऐसा हो रहा है कि
हाँ, तो and you see how the approaches are actually getting directly asked in the examination. It is just how we interpret the question. Or in questions like these, we often find ourselves wanting कि यार अच्छा इसमें क्या करें? अच्छा पढ़ाई नहीं था. Okay. So broad trends emerge. Broad trends in the evolution or in the current status of the CPA. That is, it has become from normative to empirical. You see that the traditional CPA and the traditional studies were largely descriptive, normative in character. You identify certain principles and see that okay, you apply these principles and it will bring about the efficiency, effectiveness, economy. And that was largely the Western held orientation. Okay. But CPA actually brought in the cultural aspects into the equation. Okay. And the behavioral approach further enriched it and provided greater impetus towards scientific inquiry, experimentation. You see, entire behavioral project, humanistic behavioral project is about experimentation. Light bulb experiment, this experiment, that experiment, Hawthorne studies, etc. So, the focus moves from normative to empirical. Okay? From ideographic to nomothetic. सुने ये terms? Have you heard these terms? क्या मतलब होता है? नहीं, मतलब ये थोड़ा तीर आंख बंद करके चल गया है. ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं. So basically, ideographic looks at a single agency or a single country or a single case. For example, for the developing world, I will take one or two cases and assume and extrapolate that this is for the entire developing world, and it is like that. Okay, so the initial studies, if you look at CPA, they were ideographic in nature. right? कुछ countries ले ली and we sort of extrapolated it. It was like, okay, they look the same, so we will take Korea as a model and apply it to Japan or Thailand. Okay? And this, you see, these are sort of associated. So this ideographic approach was not normative approach. Okay. The nomothetic approach is concerned with the generalization and theories, and they observe the pattern of regularities and behavior. Regularities and behavior. So you see, you are actually looking at a pattern. You are tapping that pattern. So, empirical. So you compare, let us say you compare Japan and you compare Ghana, and then try and draw similarities based on certain criteria. Here you are not going with a criteria and filtering them. Here you are first studying them, then bringing up the commonalities and then the similarities and the differences. Okay, so the yardstick is not pre-decided in this case. Whereas in the empirical, in the ideographic, the yardsticks are pre-decided. Okay. So the recent studies that are emerging, they are nomothetic in nature, whereas the earlier studies which are already there have been ideographical. Broadly a trend which we have talked about and again, that is from non-ecological to ecological. I guess I have explained this. ठीक है जी. Understood? Any doubt whatsoever regarding the broad changes? Now, let me tell you the importance why I actually dwelled upon it. Whenever there is a question based on the current aspect, for example, the question which was regarding the NPM and ICT, the current status of CPA, there if you will provide this base of theory and then provide the enrichment through the contemporary analysis, so it gives a solid grounding to your answer. Right? That is the reason that I took this up, because these things are important. The theory aspect is important. We are actually looking at paper 1, so we cannot divorce the theory argument. Okay? Understood?
So with respect to NPM, how will we link this?
No, not NPM. Let me tell you. NPM and ICT inducing the change and changing comparative administration will be a practical manifestation of what? Of this. Got it? Clear? Crystal? एक बारी फिर से सोच लो. है ना? So one is the theory, other is the implementation. Remember, public administration as a discipline and as a profession, as an activity. So we will be serving our answer in the form of a very balanced platter to the examiner, and the examiner will appreciate that. The moment you root it to a concept, see, general argument तो कोई भी कर सकता है ना. I mean, you can go on a tea shop and talk about anything. उसका कोई मतलब थोड़ा ही है. ठीक है? So these insights are very important. That how you can link CPA. Similarly, when we'll take up development dynamics, we'll link it with that as well. Similarly, NPA, etc. सब कुछ है तो public administration ही ना, link हो रहा है. ठीक है? Next. and again we'll take the leaf out of the PYQs. Less has been asked from this particular idea, right? But nonetheless, we should have a look at it. The historical and sociological factors affecting administrative systems. So there was this question in 2018, and always in questions from this kind of sections, you will find that the questions are vague and abstract in nature. Largely it is now true for the entire paper, but especially with regards to topics like these. For example, 2018 question 8A, 20 marks. Administrative systems across the world can be understood only in their respective historical and social contexts. Now, interestingly, what will happen in a question like this? 99.9% people would refer to the factors, how your standard notes from your classroom, that how historical and sociological factors influence. Obviously, you will get marks like that only then. Herein, if you can induce an element of CPA, but there is a reason, no? Historical and sociological factors impacting the administration or shaping the administrative systems. Why they have given this head under CPA unit? Why? So from non-ecological to ecological trend and the approaches, the ecological approach. ठीक है, उसको बेस बना के we'll make that a base and then we'll put those factors. तो हमारा आंसर बेटर होगा. Our answer will be better. Understood? अरे भाई, understood? Any query whatsoever?
Historical and sociological factors तो नहीं. Apart from that, we can mention the ecological factors.
नहीं, history and sociology is a part of the ecology, no?
So CPA को कैसे link करें?
Okay. Historical and sociological factors impacting the administrative system. You have heard the tool that whenever we study CPA, here CPA will be in shadows. CPA as a concept will not be a prominent concept here. The impact will be here, but the way you study the impact, the how element, how and why, let us say X impact. How will you justify this how and why unless you analyze? What do you analyze with? CPA, obviously. So the point is how and why is CPA. So you have the ecological approach. Earlier it was a Western ideal bureaucratic centric approach. So you were not looking at the sociological factors and other things. Okay, but now you are looking at it, that is emanating from the ecological approach to CPA, that you analyze the historical and sociological factors. And increasingly, as new CPA comes, it is becoming more ecological. That we have seen in the trends. It is becoming more ecological, more empirical, more nomothetic, all those things. So, करना कुछ नहीं है इसमें. You just have to garnish. You understand? Just a small thin layer, glaze. So the level of your answer, the quality of it, the depth in it elevates. ठीक बात? हाँ, सही. कुछ गलत तो नहीं पढ़ा रहा मैं? चलो, ठीक है. Okay, understood this aspect, friends watching us online? Understood this one? हाँ जी, अंडरस्टूड. बताओ यार. Great. Okay. So I'll not delve very deep into the historical and sociological factors. They are very much there in your notes. Perspective of history from the Roman times, from our very own Arthashastra, Gupta administration, Chol administration, Mughal administration, the colonial administration. We can draw great amount of insights. Similar is the case with the administration and politics in different countries. Here largely you have the comparison of the various systems. Of lately there have been again very less focus of UPSC on this. There was this question in 2021, and now this is interesting. You see, here there are two strands. One is theory and one is practice. I'll read the question and immediately a bulb will light in your brains. Okay? The approach to the study of administration in its environmental context is especially more useful for developing countries. The approach to the study of administration in its environmental context. Which approach? No, ecological, environmental context aa gaya na. Divyanshi, word. Remember the word. Environmental context means ecological approach. Okay? Is especially more useful for developing countries. Now, why I said theory and practice? Theory part, ecological approach, the coming up of the neotheetical, empirical, all these character, more useful, justified. The practical example you will have to give from your notes comparing developing countries. So you would have made notes, no? India, Pakistan, Thailand, US, UK. So the practical examples will come from there. This is a practice orientation or contemporary question in paper 1 where no current affairs is involved. You understand? 10 number ka question hai, easy hai. But the point is that you will have to understand that the theoretical aspect, the ecological and those approaches that we were dealing with, those has to be there. Okay, the empirical, nomothetical, from ecological to ecological, the ecological part is there, and the practice you will have to talk about the comparative aspect. Developing countries. ठीक है? समझ में आया? So you'll have to take, let us say, take 2 developing countries. The best would be, in nowadays, in my opinion, would be India and Bangladesh. है ना? Textile sector का example ले लो, trade ले लो, उसमें geographical location will also come. Political systems are largely similar. Because there also you have the Prime Minister. Here also. Okay? Things like that. Or if you want to take a presidential form of system and a prime ministerial, take India, Sri Lanka. ठीक है? Or India, China would be somewhat far-fetched. India and Brazil you can take. ठीक है? So this is pretty much about the administration and politics in different countries. I do not want to get deep into it, one, because it is largely factual details. Okay, and it has not been very frequently asked by the examination. So I do not want to actually dwell a lot upon it. Okay. Next, we will take up a general sort of appraisal. some general points which will help you across. Not that we haven't discussed it, but I want you to structure it at a place. You see, a lot of research has not come out of CPA. Right? The central idea of CPA was what? Can you tell me? Why CPA was done altogether?
Countries were getting independent, so they were looking for administrative systems
For what?
for development.
Yes, for development. So DA is at the heart of CPA. Comment. 10 marker, that's the second homework for you. DA is at the heart of CPA. ठीक है? So while we see that the quest for the CPA began because there was a requirement for development, but CPA actually has not been able to contribute that much to the development as paradigms like NPM etc. have. Right? We can have a debate about the quality and the profile of that development, but CPA has not led to a lot of development in general. Okay? But a scholar, Jong S. June, write down the statement, and this is important because CPA has contributed. This is my explanation, I'll dictate the quote. CPA has contributed to the globalization within public administration. ठीक है? Another statement, CPA has brought about the globalization of public administration. Comment. You see questions इसी तरीके के आते हैं ना एग्जाम में. Okay, so Jong S. June actually notes that the study of comparative administration, the study of comparative administration places the field of public administration in a world context. So while CPA might not actually create a lot of theories of its own, but it does contribute in theory building. Okay, so that is a few important points of the general appraisal about the CPA. Also, CPA helps you analyze the events and their management in international context better. Okay, so again that is one more point that you should note. Also, the new CPA which has emerged, it is far more action oriented. It believes, or rather its interests lies in application and translation of theories into practice. So you see, this new CPA is actually enabling the administration to learn from cross-cultural contexts. How? Learning from others. We are changing our policies. For example, GST, gender budgeting, environment budgeting, bringing up, personnel management, CPA, peer reviews, 360-degree appraisal, intergovernmental relations, etc. Whereas, in the past, the old CPA was largely a Western prescription to the developing world. So when you see the branches in terms of the new CPA and how it is impacting the administration, you will write all these points. Okay? And it is doing it with a combination of old and new. For example, systems approach remains relevant. Okay, so is the idea of public choice, etc. Okay, that continues to remain a part of the new CPA. Please understand that. Okay, understood? Friends watching us online, understood? Saurabh, and others, understood? Okay. Now, let us take up another important aspect, which is the ecology and administration. The ecology and administration. Here I want to talk about gauze. Heard the name? कहाँ सुना? सुना? और हाँ कहाँ सुना है? So this I am giving you a scholar gauze to actually reinforce the idea of ecology and administration. That's the simple utilitarian motive for the examination. Okay, so I hope you all get that. So he first actually elaborated on this approach in the year 1945. Okay, in his work Reflections of Public Administration. Reflections of Public Administration, wherein he talked about relating the government functions to the environment. After environment, open the bracket and write people, varying political, economic, social conditions, scientific technology, social technology, wishes, ideas, catastrophe मतलब आपदा, कोई आपदा, ठीक है, catastrophe and personality. So the idea that what all should ecology entail, the Gaussian view is that it should entail all of these things. Also, an underlying deduction was that the administrative culture is an outgrowth of the interaction of values and traits administrative culture is the outcome, or is the outgrowth rather, not the outcome, outgrowth of the interaction of values and traits of the administrative system with the social system as a whole. So you understand, every social organization, administration is what? It is also a social organization. Right? Scholars, the behavioral school, etc. talk about it. Administration is a social system. So it will get impacted by the social dynamics, and that is what actually Gauss is trying to say, and they are interdependent. They feed into each other. A good example would be, I don't know, are you all millennials? I'm not asking anyone's age. Are you all millennials or before 2000? Okay. Anybody before 90? No. Okay. So I feel old. Shit. Okay. So the point here is that when the Delhi Metro was starting, okay, so I happened to be a Delhiite, and we went. And initially, people broke windows for no reason, just for fun, right? Mazar. Even in Vande Bharat that happened, right? So let's take example of Vande Bharat, okay? Can anybody edit this part? Okay. So Vande Bharat, okay, people will do this. But gradually people started respecting the system. They would not actually spit or do things. So earlier you would see a lot many signs, thukna mana hai, spitting is prohibited, but now you don't need it. Because the social aspects, behavior, traits, attitude, likes and dislikes, I like to spit, for example. Somebody might think like, not I, okay, but the point is, somebody might think like that. So it is shaping the administrative culture. If it's a bad practice, administration ought to penalize it. You understand? But now, the administration is shaping that culture. So that is the beauty of ecology. Okay.
So even can that also be mentioned here, sensitization of corruption?
Sensitization of corruption would again, when you refer the sensitization of corruption, it can be mentioned. It can be mentioned. Right, but I want you to avoid any sort of controversies which make you understand my reservations, right? Okay. So those are my only reservation when you talk about because these concepts, sensitization of corruption, Indianization of poverty, things like that, they tend to, you never know to which ideology the person evaluating your copy belongs. So always avoid such controversial areas. Take secular example which are ideology neutral, at least, unless you are talking about that ideology itself. Okay, so this is something that you should remember. Right. So to understand any organization or the bureaucracy structures and function, the bureaucracy has to be seen, or the administration has to be seen in its societal or the social, cultural or the environmental context. Okay. So for example, in highly industrialized, so-called developed societies, they would work for businesses as well. and they would not be apologetic about it. Right? Most of the American Air Force fighters are developed either by Boeing or Lockheed Martin, and they are perfectly fine about it, a private company earning money out of national defense. Right? Because they think that okay, they have to invest in R&D, etc., etc., and it's a competitive environment. But here in India, the moment we say that Tata is going or Reliance has got the Rafale contract, I mean, no more that contract exists, but just a hypothetical scenario. Immediately the red flags are, there are protests. प्रधानमंत्री चोर है, ये है, वो है, पता नहीं क्या क्या बातें होती हैं. So you understand that there the administration not only has to cater to the public context but also the compulsions of the economy. Today there are poor people. You give and please understand, I am talking it from the lens of purely concepts. I am not anti-farmer or pro-industry. The idea is that a scheme like PLI or any tax holiday to an industry is questioned, whereas farm loan waivers are not. There should be an element of rationality here also and there also. People are shouting, oh, the Agniveer got paid by insurance company. Arey, who bared the premium? This is just an administrative arrangement so that the family or the aggrieved family of the Agniveer will not have to go through apply. There is a mechanism which has been created. But again, there is, elements like, there are elements which are questioning that. Right? So the point is this, that these things actually happen. So the goals of the administration in a developing space, the changes because of that ecology. We say India is a country but a nation in making. So the goals become nation building. Now please understand, while we are talking about this, link it with civil services unit paper 2. The goals of the civil service. Why they are these goals in Indian context? There must be a reason, no? Ecology. Okay, so socio-economic progress, nation building, etc. becomes the goals in the developing country. Also, you will have to understand that in many of these developing countries, the structure and the orientation of the administration, the attitudinal disposition, has been that of other colonial masters. A good example is the police in India. So when you see the police in India, law and order administration, link. Okay? So when you see the police in India, it is still high-handed, top-down, highly pyramidal. So the moment you see a policeman approaching you and stopping you, immediately, even if you haven't done anything, right? है ना, होता है ना, यार इसने क्यों रोक लिया भाई? होता है ना, अब क्या बात हो गई? There is an element of fear. There is an element of concern which gets generated. So the value dispositions are not changing. The ecologies change. So there is a lag. And that lag is the place from where the dissatisfaction germinates. Okay. So this is another idea of the ecology and administration. And all of these aspects are actually highlighted in Gaussian views. Okay. Similarly, you have the Riggs, who's actually looking at the ecological view, because he takes the systems structural functional approach and largely studies the ecology. Okay. So that brings the Riggsian models, etc. into the picture. I hope you all know about the Riggsian models. If there is any query regarding Riggsian model as of now, then you can ask. Otherwise, I'll directly jump to the criticism, because models I do not want to spend energy. They are pretty standard, well known, well read by everyone. Okay, are there any queries, friends online? Any queries? Okay. Still, if you revise and there would be doubts. Ideally, if you'll make the revision good revision, there would be doubts. So ask them in the mentorship. Okay. Or if something is really troubling you, drop me a text. Now I'll directly move to the criticisms of rigs. You see, there are terminologies, and this is a basic criticism. So we'll start from basic to far more significant. The terminologies that rigs use, these terminologies are problematic. Critics say that the terminologies are not very easily comprehensible. You don't understand. There were new words, prismatic, sala, this and that. Agraria, industria, transitia. So it gets difficult to make actual sense of those words. Okay, so the language, and this is a humorous take, which his critics take, that is there. Also, the criticism, and this criticism is by Han Bin Lee. So, funny name, you might think, H-A-H-N-B-E-E-N and Lee, L-E-E, Han Bin Lee. He says that the prismatic and Sala models are the equilibrium models. These are the equilibrium models. Because they give us no direction on the process of social change vis-a-vis development. On the process of social change vis-a-vis development. And hence, he doubts the utility of the models themselves. Why? Can anybody justify this? What are the features of prismatic model? Or Sala model? Okay, but okay, formalism, overlapping, etc. That brings me to an aspect called formalism. One more homework. Ready a 250 word, not 250, 250 ज़्यादा हो जाएगा. 150 to 200 words on this concept of formalism. Concept of formalism. Okay? So they are the equilibrium models because they do not take, the idea is equilibrium because they do not reflect the social change. It reflects that how society is placed, but how it is changing, it is not giving you any sort of hint. Okay? So it does not actually tell you the developmental journey that from level D1, if I am rising to level D2, it does not measure this, nor it gives any direction. So that is one of the flaw. Again, change is something, because we are looking at comparative public administration. Remember, it's the development that is at the core. Development means change. Change means dynamism. Whereas diffracted model actually shows a stability. So again, it is contradictory. And therefore, they say that the models are impracticable. While second prominent criticism is, while the RIGS is using ecological approach in its analysis, but it is not truly ecological. Okay, it is looking at how environment impacts the administrative structure. So the focus on structure is so much that it is ignoring or sidestepping the entire administrative system aspect. He is looking at the input that the environment is giving into the administration, but not the throughput that is coming out of the system to the environment. So you will see that even in the end, Riggs also agreed towards his later part. He agreed that his models are not very representative, but as a framework to study. So it might be a very good yardstick when we study it as a discipline, but the moment we take it as a profession or as an activity, there where it is the problem. But the theoretical study is something that Riggs breaks down in a very decent manner. So this is to balance out the criticism argument. Also, there are limited set of structural combination in Riggs model, whereas in reality you will find far varying hues of the administrative systems that exist. Okay? Then there is the formalization aspect, overlapping formalization aspect, which have been criticized as well. Okay, so that is your homework, formalization. Therefore, I am not getting into much of it. Also, there is an allegation that the Riggsian analysis actually suffers from Western bias. Okay? Because the negative attributes in the pragmatic societies are being defined with a Western lens. Okay, so that is there. So that is one of the larger flaw of the comparative administration school as well in general, that they are using the Western template to judge the developing countries. Understood? Also, the Riggsian theories are actually very peculiar and different from the classical or the true blue administrative theories, right? In the sense that they do not focus on the human behavior in an organization, but on the administration environment interaction. Okay? So while his ecological approach is broad in outlook, it has an integrated approach as well. It is broad yet integrated. That is to give some credit to our very own Riggs. Formalization is something that I talked about. But let me, cancel that, because we'll be doing a PYQ, the formalization homework. I'll talk about the formalization. So we'll talk about all the three: heterogeneity, formalization, and overlapping. Why I am saying this? Because often these things are asked in the examination. So heterogeneity we largely see in the prismatic society. A large degree of heterogeneity. That is the simultaneous or the side-by-side presence of different systems, different practices. Okay, and viewpoints. So they all exist in a common geographical and social entity. And therefore it influences the administrative system. Now, understand the manifestation of heterogeneity in the administration itself. There is an IG system and commissionerate system. Heterogeneity hai within India. Hai nahi? Within India, while you have a regular Panchayati Raj institutions, you have the autonomous regions as well, where certain provisions do not apply. Okay. So also biggest heterogeneity. So while understand it like this. There is a union, then there are states and union territories. Heterogeneity. States and union territories, urban local governments, PRIs, heterogeneity. ठीक है, लिंक कर पाएंगे? अब इसे लिंक करेंगे in your studies, in your revision, you will have to link it with things like neo-localism. Isn't neo-localism, paper 2, rural development unit, isn't neo-localism a practical manifestation of theoretical heterogeneity as given by Riggs? हाँ जी, कहीं कुछ बत्ती जल रही है, बल्ब जल रहा है कुछ? And I understood this part, heterogeneity. Okay. ठीक है जी. Rest you can read about, what is post-communal society, what happened in Latin America, all that stuff. Next comes formalism. Formalism is nothing but the discrepancy that exists between what is prescriptive and what is descriptive. That is, what is between formal and effective. Okay? So, while the formalism exists in societies, laws are not followed in letter and spirit. Rules and regulations exist, but they are not followed. Whereas there are societies where if a law exists, law is getting followed. Go and try and spit in Singapore or Dubai, you'll know how law is followed. Whereas you can practically get away by stabbing a man in certain parts of India. उसकी लाश ही नहीं मिलेगी 2 हफ्ते तक. Okay, so that is something which is there. Also, if you analyze at a deeper level, formalism exists in all the aspects of one's social life. Because at times the change, because law is what? Law is an objective statement, but at times it is also a static statement. And the newer generations, the newer undercurrents will challenge it. So for example, there was a common belief, a formalism in social structure where girls were allowed to do certain things and were not allowed to do certain things. But the feminist idea, the idea of gender emancipation, the idea of more education actually brought about that change. So it is not always about the stagnation. Please understand. Or formalism is not always a very good or a very bad idea. It depends in which context we are applying it. Okay. So that is there. Last but not the least, the idea of overlapping. If somebody wants to understand these three parts, okay, they can refer to IGNOU material. Crisp 100 words paragraphs are given, okay, and very good, simple English, okay. So overlapping would largely mean where the various structures, the differentiated structures in the society coexist with the undifferentiated ones, fused type. Because the administrative behavior, the administrative culture, the nature of administration will all be influenced by not just the differentiated structures but also the non-differentiated ones. Differentiation you understand as part of Riggs analysis. Short note, 200 words. Differentiation is an essential component of Riggsian theory. लिख के लाना. Differentiation is an essential component of Riggsian theory. लिख के लाना मतलब कल क्लास में लेकर आना, या फिर either get it in the class in the physical paper form, or better would be that you make those notes and follow the process that I have told in the first session. Okay, there is an email that you will have to do, that's it. Okay. So with this, pretty much the discourse ends for today. I would like you to write a PYQ as well. So how many homeworks are there? One is the old CPA, new CPA one. Other is this one. Okay. One question. Globalization of NPM has enriched the CPA. Explain. Treat it as a 15 marker. डिफिकल्ट है क्वेश्चन, इजी नहीं है, लेकिन जो हमने पढ़ाया अगर ढंग से पढ़ा है तो समझ में आ जाएगा. Right? And write a PYQ. And the maximum time that you have for all of this is 30 minutes. The entire homework. Revise it if you want, but write it on your own. Don't see it from a book or a source. Okay? Another would be okay, write down this. Comparative public administration started with CPA, this is a PYQ 2020. Okay, just in case you missed some, then you can look on the internet. CPA started with no paradigm of its own, no paradigm of its own, and developed none, and developed none. Comment. Treat it as a 10 marker. Treat it as a 10 marker. So 4 homeworks. One is the old CPA, new CPA. Then is the aspect of differentiation in Rixian theory, and this question which I gave, and the PYQ. Alright. So before we leave the class, just flip through the pages and let me know if there is any doubt, so that you should not go home with a doubt. Okay. Basically, Anay wants me to explain formalism in Indian context. Any application of law, Anay, there exists a level of formalism where law is there but it is not applied. Okay. So what is a formal behavior and an effective behavior? Okay. MPs are supposed to be public servants. They are supposed to be social servants, but they act like they are the masters. Understood that, Anay? Alright. Okay. So let's call this class a close. Right? If there are any doubts, do let me know. We'll take that up. Acha, we are soon creating a WhatsApp group based on people those who are there, so that you all can also indulge in peer learning and peer activities. Right? So you will be receiving a formal notification in your My Account section. So do follow that and join that. Okay? Thank you.
So the next class is on Monday.
No, tomorrow.
Is there a schedule
Yes, there's a schedule.
on the website?
Yes, there's a schedule on the website. Let me show it to you. So, here is the schedule. You see? Okay, so here, no, here is the schedule. This is the old schedule. So, today we talked about CPA. This is the second class, right? The third class is this. So, it's going, sorry? You take the original schedule from the website. This is the old schedule. We made it before. So, the topics remain the same. Okay?